Good afternoon, and welcome to Building Commercial Vehicles for the Road Ahead. I'm Candy McCollum from Convoy, and we're just going to jump right into the big question, what's next for building work trucks? Because honestly, the old way of doing things just doesn't cut it anymore. We're moving to a world where connectivity, data, automation aren't just fancy extras. They're the foundation of everything that we're building. As well as our buyers and fleet managers, they expect a more streamlined, informed, and effective process. So our goal today is just to figure out how to make trucks smarter by breaking down silos and really getting into the data and applying intelligence. I'm joined by three experts who are living this every day. Sorcha from TruckScience, Brian Reese from Patrol EV, and Matthew Austin from Viatec. So before we jump in, let's just do a quick round robin intro. Just tell us who you are, your role, specific problem that you're solving right now, or a trend that you have on your radar. Sorcha?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying the sessions all morning. I'm Sorcha O'Grady, Chief Sales Officer at TruckScience. We help chassis dealers, body and equipment manufacturers, upfitters, and fleet engineers eliminate the guesswork when speccing trucks. So our goal is to ensure that every configuration is safe, compliant, and efficient, or optimized for maximum payload. Thank you, Candy. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, same. Matthew?
Hi, my name is Matthew Austin. I'm the Director of Business Development for Viatec. And the problem that we are addressing is very simple. Idle reduction and emissions reduction at work sites for medium and heavy duty vocational vehicles. And we do that by using fleet electrification solutions that are chassis agnostic and fuel agnostic. And we can pretty much work with any type of upfitter. And in 3 words, we're the power guys.
I like it. Brian?
Yes, hello everybody. Brian Reese. I am the CEO of Patrol EV, and we are a specialized company that focuses on both creating product for upfitting electric vehicles and completing the upfit service itself. And most of our solutions revolve around the fact that electric vehicles do not have adequate low voltage power sources for powering upfit equipment, lights, sirens, accessories. So we've solved that problem and are the leading upfitter in that space right now.
Excellent. So I think we've all agreed the industry is shifting from intuition to intelligence. So maybe to kick this off, we'll just start with the foundation. Engineering truth that protects the customer, the dealer, and the upfitter. At Convoy, we're seeing buyers aren't just looking for generic work trucks anymore. They're actively searching for specific vocation capability. But in the real world, there's often a gap between a fleet manager saying, I want this, and an engineer and verifying this is safe and compliant. Sorcha, we would want to avoid a scenario of discovering non-compliance after the build's already done. So how are people using your tech to make sure that we aren't just building a massive liability? And how do we get this right before the first bolt even goes on?
Thanks, Candy. We've certainly heard all the horror stories about non-compliant bills, invalidated warranties, and maintenance headaches. And this is in spite of a huge community of fleet engineers and upfitters who have that killer combination of intelligence, knowledge, and experience. But in some cases, in the worst case, I guess, this has come down to guesswork. In others, people have been doing complicated manual calculations or using spreadsheets. And even where tools have been used, there have been long delays, either searching for the information or waiting for OEMs or body and equipment manufacturers or engineers to come back with information. So the data has been hard to find. In some cases, upfitters have relied on just weighing chassis on the lot. Of course, by then, they're already stuck with that chassis that they have. So we are obviously advocating for communicating and collaborating earlier in the process, finding the data, and then making sure that you're speccing the correct chassis, body, and equipment before you start it all, before you even get that chassis. We've also come across this retrospective validation where vehicles are being weighed at the end of the upfit process. Where is the end? I guess the end is where the nightmare starts normally. And the nightmare can be anything from insufficient payload, maintenance issues, invalidated warranties, right down to being hit with fines when the vehicle is already on the road, or worst case of all, I guess, ending up in court after an accident. So we're trying to, as I said, advocate using, trying to get, I guess there's a lot of tribal knowledge. I spoke about that, that there's a lot of intelligence, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of experience. But the more experienced people are talking to us about that responsibility of passing on their tribal knowledge. It's a difficult thing to do. A lot of tribal knowledge, of course, by its nature is just held in the head. And those that are new to the industry with the best of intentions can be limited by their inexperience. So our vision is to make the tribal knowledge available to these less experienced people in the industry by bringing the math, the product specs, and the regulations all together in one tool or one place.
Yes, I love that.
So I guess the starting point can often be what we've always done, but of course this represents a huge challenge in a changing world. Battery weight changes things up. So do changes in regulations. For instance, in some states you get an extra £2,000 allowance on your gross weight. In others you don't. And that challenge of being able to, on the previous session or the session before that, they spoke about the dealers or your competitors are not necessarily 3 miles down the road. They can be 10 states away. If you're dealing with people 10 states away, you're going to need to know 10 states worth of regulations to get there. So that's the challenge we're trying to solve, Candy.
Excellent. And I think probably for our time together today, we're going to hear a lot about communication or handing it off the information to the next person. So say we get it built right on paper. And because physics gives us the green light before we spend the money, next comes the reality check. So once that truck's built and deployed, it has to perform. Mm-hmm. And Brian, you're out there in the wild on the cutting edge technology with Tesla and Rivian, basically computers on wheels. Fleets are excited, but there's real apprehension about EVs and upfit compatibility and performance under heavy-duty work cycles. As you talked about in your intro, as upfitters shift from installers to system integrators, how do you use innovation to prepare?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that a lot of fleets are very EV curious because of the expected savings, operational savings, mostly fuel and maintenance costs are significantly reduced. But when it comes to upfitting, it's not like you can just splice into the wiring harness on the EVs and tap into power and support your lights, sirens, radios, equipment. Because the electric vehicle architectures from Tesla and Rivian in particular, they do not have an adequate 12-volt or low-voltage power source. And there are all kinds of attempts to try to power off of the Tesla or Rivian, but the risks that people face are, the first and foremost is that your upfit fails. If the low-voltage power source shuts off for any reason, let's say the underlying vehicle architecture infers your equipment as a short, it's going to kill that circuit. And that's the worst case scenario we feel. If we put a fleet in service with an upfit and then you lose power, everything is downhill from there. The second concern is, like you mentioned, these are rolling computers. They're connected and they receive over-the-air updates. So there is an over-the-air update obsolescence risk in that what you do today may no longer be good tomorrow, because an over-the-air OEM update to the underlying architecture could change how the vehicle is allowing power to flow through low voltage circuits. And if it was working and something changed in their over-the-air update, that could render the upfit inoperative as well. And then, of course, if you are drawing too much power through these circuits, you could end up with warranty issues where the manufacturer, like a Tesla or Rivian, could say, "Hey, you guys are pulling too much power through this circuit, and we're not going to warranty now that you've had a DC to DC converter failure or wiring harness failure." So it's nuanced to say the least, but the good news is it's manageable. And we at Patrol EV, we've created a standalone low voltage power system that interfaces with the underlying architecture to recharge itself, but it's not a risk that it's going to cause a warranty issue or be shut down from the vehicle perspective. And most importantly for us, is it stands alone. So if something happens to the vehicle underlying system, let's say the Rivian or the Tesla goes to limp mode or something, we rest assured that our upfit is still powered by our power system, which is independent. So it's like I think the theme you're going to see today is just planning this out and working within the guardrails of this emerging technology is what we're trying to lead.
Great. I love it. Build it right and keep the tech safe. So let's talk about where the money's actually won or lost, maybe on the job site. Matthew, that would be you. Idling's burning money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you only have to go and look at some of the costs of business that are being incurred in major cities. New York City, there's actually a kind of a vigilante system available to report people who are idling. I think people have made quite a lot of money off that. But in all seriousness, idling is, from an economic standpoint, is a real problem on work sites. If you think about a vocational truck and its typical duty cycle, you include travel to and from the site. It may be a 6 to 8 hour average duty cycle. Let's call it that. If 75% of that time is spent at the work site, and you're operating either hydraulics, electric generator, diesel generators, or just idling to provide basic cab comfort, that's a lot of idling. And think about most engines that are not EV. They are basically not designed to be sitting still. It's like a dog needs to go for a walk, right? They should be operational at an optimal speed. So running an idling engine at a work site is bad for the engine. It's a lot of unnecessary wear and tear. So what we decided to look at is to say, how could you provide for medium and heavy duty vehicles, specialty vehicles, at the work site, an independent power source, not dissimilar to what Brian's talking about, but usually on class 6 to class 8 type vehicles. So, well, we went through this. We're in our 4th generation of product, and essentially the benefits that you can bring to play with an intelligent power system are as follows. It's like, first of all, it's about 80 decibels lower than working with a diesel PTO or power takeoff. And it's also zero emissions. So you're essentially got a power plant on site. And the most important thing that anybody who is investing in this technology is going to know is it going to provide diesel equivalent performance or better? And how does it interact with the chassis? So, those are the kind of things that went into our design approach. And then, the other thing is this: if it works, great. If it's satisfying to the end users, that's wonderful. There are health and safety benefits to users and also neighborhoods where they're working because there's no emissions and no noise, especially for nighttime stuff. But what's really interesting is that we kind of said, well, you know what? There's a lot of people who'll be pretty skeptical about this unless you can actually provide verifiable proof that it's doing what it says it does. So the second half of what we do, apart from the hardware installation, is to provide really comprehensive telematics. So we have a dashboard which is AI driven. We take customer cost inputs, And then we were able to track the performance of that engine idling reduction. And that correlates directly to sustainability metrics on CO2, nitrous oxide reductions, but also things like fuel and other maintenance sellings. So if you're a dealer, you think about this as like the kind of ultimate intelligent sale, because you're not just selling, a truck. You're selling something which is actually, has got a verified and economic case behind it in terms of fuel costs and reduced engine wear. And the proof of the pudding is that we're on a fourth generation of this technology right now, and we're seeing the not only savings during the normal life cycle of a truck, but actually the extension of the life cycle, because you're not using the engine as much if you're not idling. So you can actually kind of put less wear and tear. And by the way, if your warranty coverage is based on engine hours, then you get the benefit of extended warranties with an extended lifespan. So we tend to look at this as as being a transformational innovation for the work site, but it's backed up with pretty powerful economic dynamics. And I think that what Brian mentioned was like, it's sometimes difficult to quantify that and to show that as a break-even plan or total cost of ownership. But we're seeing that more and more people are coming around to that approach and engaging in financial modeling before they've even spent $1 on actual system.
I think that goes to kind of what we're talking about, where the fleet managers and buyers are a lot more informed. They're already using intelligence in other aspects of their business. We're starting to see them to apply that to their buy decisions.
Sure.
And then when they are testing or looking into new solutions, they're expecting same type of information back. And I think that kind of rolls us into the futuristics. So we've gone from the blueprint to the battery to the job site. If we step a little bit into the future, what happens when these smart systems start talking to each other without us even hovering over them? So maybe something that would blow our minds for the next couple of years. How do we start teaming up now? Because we've talked about handing things off, right? We've talked about at the dealership, the chassis, the OEM, the upfitter. How do we start teaming up now and having conversations?
Well, let me give you go ahead, Sorcha.
Randy, I guess you've touched on something there, that there's an expectation now with how easy it is to get information and how quick it's expected. That that's a challenge for all of us to be able to present information, and I guess in some cases surprising information clearly and quickly. I guess every conversation now is kind of going towards the AI and GenTech and everything, and in our case, we kind of foresee a future where I know Nikki Wilson spoke earlier about the importance of really digging down into what your customer needs, not just presenting a solution before you've really understood. For instance, when you're speccing a vehicle, that the vehicle would not be specced until you understand where does this vehicle need to go and what kind of road surface, what is the job to be done, what is the load to be carried, or what is the, if it's a work truck, what is the job to be done. So we kind of foresee, we're not there yet, obviously, but we want to be able to surprise the user, I guess, or the end user, both pleasant surprises in terms of what payload they may have been leaving on the table, and I guess that on the other hand, there are those nasty surprises of maybe a vehicle is compliant when it's with a full load but not an empty load. But we want to kind of bring all this compliance into the background so that an end user can define what they need the vehicle to do, where they need it to do it, in which state or province, what kind of road surface, etc., and then have all this configuration and compliance going on in the background. And that's a challenge for integration, pushing the kind of jobs we no longer really want people to have to even think about into the background, and then it becomes more of a shop window.
I think just mentioning, like, I heard Nikki say that as well, right? So if we're looking at it like a fleet, right? So fleets collect a lot of data. So I would ask all three of you guys and gals, where do you see the fastest ROI when it's actually used? The data that the fleets are collecting now.
From our perspective, it's mainly on fuel cost savings. So if you think about an hour of idling, usually equates to like a gallon of diesel. So if you think about that, it's 5.51. I think I checked the average diesel price today. You multiply that over the number of hours per day, number of days per year, and then you've got a very quantifiable cost saving on fuel alone. And then you build in other cost inputs that can be gleaned from fleet managers and operations maintenance folks around the cost of replacing a DPF filter, all those kind of things. So once you've got that information from the specific customer, you can build that into the experience of using the system. And then you can map that against the cost of the system. So you end up with a total cost of ownership profile that allows you to look at that. And for example, we realize that utilization of a system is only as good as its adoption. So if people are not adopting it, then you try and figure out what's the root cause. And then you can track that with like our AI telematics can actually look at like a fleet of say 10 vehicles and say, oh, half of these are underperforming on utilization. How can we detect that to start with and then recommend ways in which that could be improved? It could be training or something like that. But the point is that you're empowering the fleet organization to take action, in some cases proactively, to improve their operational performance. So yeah, there's a lot of buzz around AI. We've kind of gotten ahead of it a little bit because we already had a telematics situation as a solution which dealt with this, and now we're trying to kind of refine it so it's even faster for the fleet ecosystem as a whole.
I can add one thing to that too. In our world, using Teslas as an example, the vehicles they come standard with integrated fleet telemetry. There's API access, so it's very easy for a fleet to track the performance of the vehicles. And as it has been mentioned, fuel costs are obviously a large component of the cost structure, but in the EV world, there is very little maintenance. Oil changes, brakes are the highest maintenance cost on normal patrol fleets, and they're practically non-existent. It'd be very rare even to change brakes on the EVs because of the regenerative braking. But I think where we come in to support on this is taking a holistic approach from an EV pitch with a municipality or a fleet that's considering them, and that not only I think they have a good understanding on the potential fuel savings, the lack of idling costs, the maintenance is something that's discussed, but there's also some infrastructure investment, charging management, which can roll into from the telemetry data, get an idea how much energy is used for a shift, if you will, and then optimizing what time is the vehicle charged at night so that they can utilize the lowest cost of electricity. And then I think finally, is the vehicle spec or the vehicle performance going to work sufficiently when it's put into duty? And that's something where there's a little bit of a fear of will this work like it should because it's electric, it's not gas, I can't start it, stop it, things like that. So at least in my world, from the upfitting perspective, in particular, like a police use case, there's some familiarity that needs to be gained. They want to test and validate, and then move toward further electrification. So I think you got to take a look at this holistically.
Yeah, I'd add something to that. When we work with utilities or municipalities on these medium and heavy duty trucks, we do a pretty in-depth forensic analysis of, like it's very basic questions. What are you using this for? How much power is required for each event activity? Could be hydraulic, could be a generation thing. And then how many of those events occur over the course of a duty cycle? And most people say an average duty cycle. We tend to kind of go towards a maximum duty cycle where you might be in a snow situation or storm recovery or something like that. So we try to kind of build out for the worst case scenario. And then you can basically take all of that information and use, basic hydraulic math, if it's a hydraulic solution, and you can come up with what is the right size battery capacity to address the needs of the crew. All right. Because the last thing you want to do is underpower them. And you want to make sure that, if they're out there for a longer than expected period, that you can get the job done. So that it's good old fashioned kind of question and answer. Let's get the data, let's input it, and then let's build out a system accordingly. And so our particular systems are modular in terms of battery size. So we size it according to the particular activity. So, a utility crew may be at 2 or 3 locations doing wire work, say for, 4 or 5 hours, whereas a vegetation management crew, they may be at 7 or 8 locations doing lots of different activities. So those both require different types of power. But all of that goes into the analysis of what's the best size of power system for that particular crew. So, it's getting to know your customer really well, so that, that there is consensus on what is the right size system for them.
And I would just like to take that and maybe talk a little bit about the optimization loop, because I think it is the learning, right? And the continuous learning from fleet outcomes that improve things over time. So from where each of you sit, is there one thing that you could see in that handoff and the speccing and the communication, whether you're working with a fleet manager or a dealer and the dealer's working with a fleet manager, that can optimize that loop of feedback so that we can just learn faster? Serica?
Yeah, I think Matthew spoke there about TCO and obviously the total cost of ownership. The cost of the vehicle is not necessarily borne on the day that the vehicle is purchased. It's obviously over the lifetime of the vehicle. I'm not a fleet manager and I don't really have that insight into maybe the operational data. But as Matthew alluded to, under or over speccing a vehicle is going to cost more in the long run. So, the way we see it, fleet managers or fleet acquisition specialists, I think is a job title we see, and they need to understand the need. And we've spoken about it, they need to understand what the energy source is going to be, whether it is gas or batteries or other alternative energy sources. They will obviously have data on maintenance costs over lifetimes of the vehicle, and that there's a lot of learning from understanding what maintenance costs were of previous builds. But in terms of the procurement, the data that we're focused on is getting that spec data. And I know Jim Press earlier in the session with the chassis OEMs and the body manufacturers hit the nail on the head when he said, your futures are tied together in a way that needs communication and collaboration like never before. We're in the very privileged position of being an independent data hub for the industry. So, as a secure third-party platform where proprietary data can be shared safely between chassis OEMs, body and equipment manufacturers, upfitters, and fleets. And that spec data is so crucial to understanding what's going to be built. Then we bring that together with the regulations data which is another whole piece, obviously, to digest the regulations for all of the states and the ongoing changes to them. The math itself is actually pretty simple. It's really the heavy lifting is the data. And so I guess, when you ask about the learnings, I think the biggest, obviously, retrospectively, analyzing maintenance costs is huge, and running costs, of course. But for us, the biggest learning is to get it right first before you start at all. So that's kind of what I can add to that.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I would build on that. I like the idea of getting it right from the start. And I think, where I'm thinking here is we have a good bit of experience behind us already, and it's always continuous learning, but we're not shy at looking what we've done and sharing that, with new prospects to try to help them understand what's possible and what limitations might be. But it's an emerging space, so there's no set script. I think we need to be open-minded moving forward. And I know from our perspective, we're welcoming solving new challenges. I think the electrification of vehicles for many of the topics we've discussed today is inevitably coming, and just embracing that and learning from what we're doing is getting easier and easier as we move forward to adopt this technology.
Yeah, I make a couple of points on the general topic here is you've got to lower the risk threshold for people to embrace innovation. Okay. And what I've found, and we work with EV chassis, we work with diesel chassis and a lot of fuel, so different types of alternative fuels in between. So what we found is there's a couple of major observations that I would make. Number one, it's great if you've got a really cool, effective on-vehicle technology. That's on vehicle, but you have to be thinking about the broader ecosystem about charging. I think Brian mentioned it earlier. If people say, "Oh, well, this is great, I'm looking forward to using this," how long does it take to charge? I said, "Well, what kind of systems you use? And you've got shore power. Is it level 2? Is it supercharge or whatever?" You have to ask those questions because it does affect their operational behavior, right? If they only have shore power, they're probably going to have to make sure that it's religiously plugged in to charge up a unit. If it's that type of unit, it has to be plugged in so it's ready for the next day's work. All right. So that's a key part of it. The second thing that we've found that has helped, particularly with municipalities, is if you're able to provide a flexible approach to a pilot, where they're able to essentially kick the tires, look at the telematics, have the crews engage in it, you are lowering the risk threshold for them before they go to a scaled buy, as it were. And we typically approach that by saying, like, what is the definition of success for you over the course of a pilot? And if they can quantify it, great. If some of it is qualitative, that's fine too. But you have to have those kind of foundational steps to say, what does success look like? And then you actually activate a pilot and you track it, and then you come to the end of the pilot and decide what the results are. And that to my mind has always been how innovation can be made more accessible to folks, because they don't feel as though they suddenly have to buy a whole brand new vehicle and they're putting a new technology on it and let's hope for the best. We actually try to find out ways of doing that, with retrofits and things like that. So I think that's very much in the mind of both dealers we've dealt with, who have got clients who they bring to us and say, "Hey, can we do this?" We go through all the analysis that I've talked about earlier, but making that decision, that kind of risk threshold lower, is definitely something that we've seen embraced by people who are willing to kind of take that first step.
Yeah. So fleets probably should be like duty cycle audits now, right? I mean, that should be
Well, it depends. It depends on where they're at, right? I mean, they have to look at what is the most important thing for their operations, and then hopefully, if that aligns with what we're bringing to the table, then you move ahead on that basis. So, but you're right, getting alignment at the beginning is what's most important for the customer is obviously job one.
Yeah, so I think that intelligence, data, teamwork, the collaboration's the real secret sauce here, right? So as we start to wrap things up today, I would just open up to if you had to give a takeaway, right, from the audience that's watching, like what would that one takeaway be on building commercial vehicles for the road ahead? Brian?
I would say embrace new technologies, and you may have to respect the underlying architecture and make sure you're not too cavalier in how you're going about the business. But I think that the benefit that's going to be received mostly in our case from a cost savings perspective is going to entice people to give it a try. But we're a big fan of embracing new technologies and finding a way to make them mainstream.
Serica?
Yeah, I guess sales has always been about relationships. So more than ever, I guess it's important to communicate and collaborate, build on those relationships of trust to share data. And we are a calculator, I guess, at the essence of it. So we say, you need to be figuring out these calculations, finding the correct tools and data, and then validating before building. No building on hope, just building on data alone now.
And kind of a follow-up question for you, I guess, with what you do. Is it the payload duty cycle variability or uptime expectations? What's the biggest constraint that you see from fleet leaders?
Yeah, I guess it depends. There are so many ways of improving a build, and there's so many ways where problems can arise. We kind of touch on a whole lot of different areas. So avoiding exceeding axle weight limits, regulatory limits. So not just obviously limits for states, but limits of the manufacturers themselves. It's important that I guess in the lighter vehicles that we're looking at safe steering and braking, and then the regulatory limits, wear and tear on the roads. But yeah, it comes down to compliance and on the kind of, that one of your speakers spoke about defense and offense earlier. The defense is more about compliance, and the offense, I guess, is about maximizing the payload. But yeah, payload is obviously key on those trucks that are carrying heavy weights.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matthew.
No, I just to kind of talk about the takeaways. I'd say what Brian's saying: embrace new technology, but demystify the fear of embracing new technology. And you can do that by making sure that end users feel comfortable that it's not going to completely change their world. It's actually going to improve it. So there's the user adoption, and then there's the hardcore economics. Go through the modeling exercise, understand what they need to do, what they're hoping to achieve, and then make a pilot or trial program accessible and executable. I think at the end of the day, those are the three components that you look for. So it's people, data, experience. If you can bring those three into alignment, then people will feel a lot more comfortable about taking that first step to embrace new technology.
Yes, I agree. We've came a long way with a lot of room to grow, right? So huge thanks to all of our experts here and everyone for hanging out with us today. Looking forward for the road ahead.